This video is an introduction to R Studio, and R Markdown. So if you've already downloaded R to your computer, you can open the basic R program. So I've pinned mine to my start menu. It's right here. And this is what it looks like, not user-friendly at all. If you need to load packages or install packages within R itself, you can go up here to Packages. So the first thing you want to do, if this is the first time you're using R, is to set your crayon mirror. So this is always the same, no matter when you use it. You're supposed to choose the crayon mirror that is closest to you in location. So you can choose California in the US. There's also in Oregon. It's probably a little bit closer. So click OK. And then if you need to install packages, go to Packages, Install Packages, and this huge menu pops up of things to choose from. So you would just need to find the package that you need, click on that, click on OK, and then you can see that it's working over here. If it's a small package, it's pretty quick. If it's a larger package, it might take longer. And then sometimes there are other packages it just automatically downloads because they're used within the new package. And then to actually use that package, you would need to load it. So you go Load Packages. These are all of the packages that either come with the base model of R when you first download and install the program, or they're the other packages that you have installed. So we just installed a package called Pairwise, so we should see that in this list. We can highlight it and click OK, and then that package is loaded. So that's one way that you can install and load packages. But we're not going to do much with this R window because you can see it's not very user-friendly. So instead, we are going to use a graphical user interface, or GUI for short, that's called R Studio. So close this R window. When it asks us to save the workspace image, we can just say no. And then if you haven't already done so, you will need to download and install R Studio itself. You can just Google R Studio download and then follow the directions. I have R Studio, since I use it so much, down in my easy access right here. Of course, you can also just go to your basic Windows, and if you've pinned it, it's there. So let's open it up. So this is what an R Studio window looks like. Notice it already has the script for Lab 1 here, because the last time I was in R Studio, this was the script I was using. And so when I closed it, it remembers what script you were working on before. So if you've opened multiple scripts, there will be multiple bars. If you closed everything before you started R Studio, it might just look like this. So if we close it, and then we close R Studio, and we open it up again, this is what we get. So if we want to open script within this, we can go to File, Open File, and then navigate to where our script is saved. And all of these, the scripts are posted on Moodle, so you'll need to download them and save them to a flash drive, or if you're working on your own computer, you can just save it to your own computer. So for me, they're in Classes, Fall 2017, Grad Stats, Lab 1, and then here's the Lab 1 script, Fall 17. So now we can see that again in this script file. This is the console. This will give us feedback when we run different pieces of the script. And then here we have our environment. As we do things, you'll see that this will fill up with various things. And then here's a much easier way to manage packages than through just the difficult R interface. So if you need to install something, you can click Install, and then you can choose. Let's see, we had done Pairwise before, so maybe we want to do Pairs DR. And you can choose what it is that you want, and then click Install. And notice here it's automatically checked Install Dependency. So if there are other packages that need to be installed to make the package that you just selected work, it will do that automatically. And then you would click Install. I'm not going to do that now because I don't know what that package is, and I don't want packages that I don't need. So I'm going to click Cancel. And then also, here you'll see these are all the packages that have already been installed. Again, either they're part of the base model or you have installed them, and if you want to use one, you can click on it and then it will automatically load that package. So basically now you have access to whatever is in that package that you want. Notice it just added this line down here. That's the script that you could also use to load that same package. Or even just the library and then the name of the package is another way to do that. So a couple of things about R Studio and R Markdown itself. So it's useful to start with this piece, and this is something that won't be read by R. It's just information for yourself to put a title, an author, a date, and then the output is going to be in an HTML document. This isn't necessary, but it's kind of a good thing to get in the practice of doing, just to keep track of what the script is for, who made it, when it was made, all of those kinds of things. And then this is very specific to R Markdown. These gray boxes, so it's called a chunk. So when you come over here to run, you have the option to run the current chunk, the next chunk, all chunks above, all below, but the chunk is just referring to this chunk of gray area with various pieces of instructions to R about what to do. You can also run the whole chunk by clicking on the green arrow, and you can also run just pieces of the chunk by clicking on a particular line and then hitting Control Enter, or if you want to do multiple lines, you can highlight multiple lines and then click Control Enter, and then that will run just what's highlighted. Sometimes that's useful if you have a big chunk and you want to run just a smaller piece of it. So you have to have these 3 ticks, and then these curly brackets, and then you have to have this little letter R. That's part of the Markdown language, if you want to call it that, that says this is where I'm creating a new chunk. And then you don't have to have something here. If you had just this, it would work perfectly fine, but it's also useful to have labels and titles to find things later. So I do recommend including some additional information in these beginning brackets for each chunk. And then the chunk has to end with these 3 ticks again. And then I like to leave white space in between my chunks, just it makes it easier, I think, to see what's going on. And then any text that starts with the number sign and is green is a note to yourself or to whoever else is going to be using this script. And you can include anything here that you want, an explanation of what's going on, what happens if you do something differently. Right? If you can see here, what I've done is told you what part of this script means. So I've explained what echo equals true means, and there's 2 ways to denote true and false within RStudio. You can type out the whole word, all caps, or you can use just a T. And then the same with false, you can type out the whole word or you can use just a capital F. And so if we have true here, then the source code is included in the output file. So when the output is created, and I'll show you how to do that toward the end, we have this piece that told R what to do, and then it also includes what that output is. Whereas if we set it to false, we only get the output. We don't get the script too. I think it's really useful to have the script, so I always keep it on true. Okay, so if we want to run just this piece, and then we're loading a library called knitter, because this is what we need to do our markdown and allows us to use this button up here when we get to that point. So if you want to run just the chunk, we click the green play or arrow button, and you can see that it had this little green bar that went by very quickly. You can click it as many times as you want. It'll just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So that green bar goes by pretty fast on this chunk because you're not asking R to do anything complicated. It runs it very quickly. If you're doing more complicated things, then there might be a pause in the progression of that green bar as it goes through your chunk if it takes it longer to do computations. So when you start doing crazy things like maybe complicated regression, multi-level modeling, structural equation modeling, sometimes that green bar could take a long time to get to the bottom of your chunk. So that's just the basic setup. We haven't done anything very interesting yet. Now this next chunk, we are going to be reading in other data files, and we're going to be doing some basic functions. So the first thing to do is to set your working directory to the folder that contains the script file, and then read in your data. And you don't have to do it this way, but I have discovered that it makes things really easy if you're working across different computers. Maybe if you have something in box storage or Dropbox storage, and you're using it in different places, or if you have especially if you have multiple people accessing the Dropbox, then you don't have to keep changing where the working directory is. So the working directory is where R will look to find files unless you tell it to look somewhere else. So this little command, super short, super simple. I'm going to highlight it because I want it to only run this part of the chunk. Do Control Enter. And now you can see it created something over here in our global environment. So now we have a value X because that's what we told it to create. This arrow sign is actually a combination of the less than sign and the hyphen. So we're creating this new thing called X, and to do that, we're getting the working directory for where our script file is. And so if we look at X over here in the values, you can see it's the C drive, users, let's Tara, right, that's me. That's the file that it's in. And then we can set the working directory to what X is, which it has already done for us because we highlighted both of those things. If you want to have it print out for you what X is, you can highlight just X, and again do Control Enter, and it'll put it down here. So this is the full location of what got put into X. Okay, and then to actually read in your data set, you can call your data set whatever you want. You can call it DataSet, just data, my data. If you're reading in multiple data sets and then you're going to be merging them, then it's typically useful to give them more descriptive names. It just depends on what you're doing and how complicated it is. And then again, we use this combination of the less than sign and the hyphen to put something into this new thing that we're creating that we want to call DataSet. Read.table is a function that R knows that you're going to read a table. Oh, and this is really helpful too. I love this in R Markdown. That if you're typing in a certain command, or here you can see I was just hovering with the mouse over this command, that'll actually give you a lot of information to help you figure out how to actually use that particular command. So that can be really useful if you don't want to have to go Google and find things out. Although it's a little cryptic, so as you can see, you kind of have to know a lot to understand what this means to begin with. Okay, and then this next part in the parentheses, so we're going to be reading in a file called school days. It's a comma delimited or a CSV file. The quotes around it are very important. It won't work if you don't have those quotes. Followed by a comma. The separator within the file is a comma because it's a CSV file, but you need to tell it that. And then another comma, and then header equals true. So this means that you want R to read the first row of data as the header. So that's going to be your variable names. So if we look at the CSV data file, right, it needs to be in the same folder where we found our script. So navigate back to that. And so we're going to read in school days down here at the bottom for me. If you double click that, right, we see our first row are variable labels, and then all of the other rows are the data itself. So this way it will read this first row as the variable names. If we used header equals false, it wouldn't do that. So we can run, again, just that piece by hitting Control and Enter together. And now we have a data set. Within data, we have data set. There's a couple of ways to see what this is. It gives you a little bit of information here. There's only so much space, and you can resize all of these windows. And depending on what I'm doing, my windows are different sizes. If I need to see what's going on over here, I might make this a little bit bigger. Usually, I keep it kind of small because I'm more concerned with what's going on over here, and this is where I want to be able to really see things. But you can click on anything that's over here, and it will open that window. So you can see it read in that first row as variables, and then it arbitrarily assigns values to each row. And if you're, in this case, this is our subject ID, if those are sequential and there aren't any missing, those numbers will be the same. But if there are ones that are missing, those numbers will not be the same. Then you can just click on the X to close that. Okay, and sometimes you don't want to see all of the data, you just want to see part of it. So if you wanted to see the first and the last 6 rows, so head data set, so again, Control Enter, and where is it, right? Sometimes it's hard to know where R puts things. So right now we're looking at our console. It's just recreating what we're telling it to do. There isn't any output it's putting here. And this is also a window that you can resize and make bigger or smaller or make it go away completely. And here now you can see there's something going on down here. This is the output of the head command. So it's the first 6 rows of data, and then it also tells you the type that each one is. So the subject ID is an integer, race is a factor. I think those are all we have. If there were additional ones, you would have an arrow over here to be able to see more. And then tail gives you the last 6 rows. So you can look at the very beginning and the very end. So if we click Control Enter, and now we get the last 6 rows. So you can see we have, larger subject IDs. This is the end of our data file, or the tail. If you want to see the whole data set, again, you can click over here in DataSet. You can also use the View command, and then it just does the same thing as if you were to have clicked on it, but sometimes different people have different preferences. I typically just go over here if I want to see the whole thing, and then I don't have this extra command that I don't need. You can also output the structure of the data set, so str is the command for that. And then again, we're just referring to the same data set. So here's a structure. It's telling us it's a data frame, that it has 105 observations and 6 variables, and then it gives us information about each variable. So SID is an integer, which means it's a whole number, no decimal points, and then it gives you the first several of those. Race is a factor with 2 levels, so this is where the numbers aren't really in and of themselves meaningful. And one of the things I really like to do in R is to, if I have a factor, to not label it with a number, then I then have to remember what the numbers stand for, but actually give it a name. So here the factor is either Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. The gender, also a factor, female or male. School is a factor. Now we have 4 levels, and we have F0, F1, F2. It didn't give us the 4th, it just gave us the first 3. And then this is the beginning of the data. The first 8 rows are the 1 value, which in this case would be the F0. And then we have learner, another factor with 2 levels, either average or slow. And so average is the 1, slow is the 2. And then absent is an integer, so this is the number of days that students were absent from school. The first person was absent 2 times, the second was absent 11 times, and on down the line. So that's a really good idea to get a feel for your data. Another thing that's really useful is to have R simply output the variable names within a data set. I use this command a lot, especially if you have a large data set. It's really useful. So the first number in brackets tells you the number of the first variable. So SID is number 1, and then it'd be race is 2, gender is 3, until you get to the end. If you have lots of variables, it will wrap around, and then the next row will start with the number value of the first variable in that column. So if we drop down here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we would have the number 7, and then that 7th variable would be right there. So if you have lots of variables and you need to know just what the names are, or if you need to know the number that goes with a certain variable, then that command is particularly useful. Okay, and then we can compute descriptive statistics either for all variables in a data set or for a single variable. So if we want to do it for all variables, summary is the command, and then just the name of the data set. So Control Enter. So here is our subject ID. We can see that the minimum value is 1. The maximum value is 154. The quartile, the median, the mean, and the upper quartile or the third quartile really aren't terribly informative because these are subject ID numbers. So that's not really very meaningful, although it is useful to check to make sure you have the right range. So looking at the min and max can be useful. And then race, since that was a factor, it's outputting frequency. So there are 7 74 Aboriginal and 80 non-Aboriginal participants in this data set. For gender, school, learner, these are all factors. So again, we're getting frequencies for the different levels of the factor. And then an actual integer variable being absent. So now the information in the middle is useful. So there was at least one person who was never absent, right? And then again, we have the first quartile, the median, the mean, and the third quartile. So it's a really good idea to always run these summary statistics and just look at your data and make sure it makes sense, because this is a good way to catch if you had something that was coded wrong or just something weird was happening. This is a good way to catch it. So if you were doing something like using 99s as missing data and you had an absent, somebody was absent 99 times. It's a little confusing with this variable because somebody really could have been absent 99 times. But if you're doing something like a 1 to 5 scale and you have a 99, you definitely know that something is wrong. And then if you want to look at just a particular variable, you can use, again, the name of the data set. The money sign means there's going to be a specific variable you're referring to. In this case, we're looking at race, but you could look at anything. So if we run just that piece, then all we get is the frequencies for race. So if you have lots of variables and you want to look at just a specific one, that's a great way to do that. And then this last class function is if you just want the type of data structure. So it tells us it's the data frame. So when we ran this command, str, it also told us that. But if that's the only thing you want to know and you don't want all that other information about each individual variable, then class is a good way to get that. Okay, and then down here we're going to create a new variable and output the data frame. So if we want to create a new variable in the data set that we're already working with, we start with the name of that data set, the money sign again, and then this is the name of our new variable, absent.inverse, and we want to put into that -1 times absent. So now, instead of people who are being absent more having larger values, people who are absent more will have smaller values. There might be a reason you would want to do that, possibly. So Control Enter. Oh, it didn't like something. So it gave me a red instead of a green. This is a good way to figure out what your errors are. Beyond just that, you can also look back in your console. So you can click this button right here, which will pull your console back up. Notice it just hid what we were working on, so we just need to slide this down a little bit. And it's telling us the error is that object absent was not found. And the reason it wasn't found was because I didn't tell R what data set to look in. So there's two ways that I can do that. One is I could type in dataset money sign absent, and then that should work just fine because it now knows which data set to look in to find this particular variable. So if we run it now, we should get a nice little green bar and no error, so that's good. The other possibility is if you don't want to type in dataset money sign, so let's get rid of that, is you can attach your data file. So let's add a command here called attach. Dataset is the only one we have, but then when we run this line, it doesn't look like it's done anything, but what we've done is we have told R that the default dataset to go to is called dataset. So now when it gets to down here and sees just the variable name, it will know where to look. So we should be able to run this now and have it work just fine. Right, and so we got a green bar, we didn't get an error, and then it wrote the command down in our console. So that's good. Here's just another option of something you could do, create a variable that is 180 minus the value for absent. So I figured, okay, maybe the total number of school days was 180, and instead of a variable that represents how many times a student was absent, we want a variable that represents how many times they were present. So still in dataset, now we want a new variable called present, and we want to put in that 180 minus the value for absent. So we can run just that. Nice green line, that looks good. And now let's look at our first 6 rows. And we should have these 2 new variables in there. So here are our first 6 rows. All right, this is what we started with. To here, absent used to be our last variable, but now we have absent inverse. We can make sure it worked to just put a negative sign in front of each value. And then present is 180 minus 2. It's always a good idea to run this head statement. Sometimes it's a good idea to run the tail too, so you can look at the last 6 rows of data to make sure that R did what you intended for it to do. So I definitely recommend doing that. And then this last thing is, let's say now we want to save these 2 new variables. We don't want to have to recreate these every time that we decide we want to use them. So we are going to output the file with these new variables. Write.cvs is the command, so it's going to write a file that is a CSV file, so the same kind of file that we read in. We're going to put DataSet in there, so it'll put this piece for all of the different participants in there, and then you can call it whatever you want. So we have double quotes, we're calling it new variables.csv, comma on the outside. Row.names equals false means that you don't want this list of row names. If you said true, then it would include these. But we have the subject ID right here, so we don't need these row names. That's something that R just put in there, but we don't want it. So we can click Control Enter. All right, we got a green bar. It wrote it down here. And really the way to check that this worked is to go back to your same file. It'll default to the working directory that we set up earlier. So go to your same file and you should have something called new variables. Right here you can make sure that the date and the time are correct. I think it's also smart just to open it up and make sure, okay, we have absent.inverse and we have present. That's what we were trying to do. It looks good. It worked. Okay, a couple of other things that are useful to know, that this knit right here, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, this is one of the most useful things about R Markdown. And you have a couple of options, so you can create an HTML file, a PDF, or a Word document. I think kind of the default is HTML, and it seems to work the best. I've sort of had some problems when I've tried to do other things. So if you click on that, this program will run pretty quickly because it's short, so it doesn't take very much time, but it creates this HTML document where you have the title. So this, right, if we can compare this file to our script file, just kind of move things around so that we can do that. But if we go to the top of our script file, right, the title is here. My name for the author, the date, so that gets put at the top of our file. And then it has the chunk of script. And then following that is whatever output you asked for. So we asked R to give us that first 6 rows of the data set, so it's printed that for us. And then we asked to give it to give us the last 6 rows, so that's printed. So it just goes through alternating between the script and the output. So this is a great way to make sure that you don't have to rerun your script every time you want to be able to look at the output. It's a great way to save the output. If you're sharing your output, so you want to send it to your advisor, or you want to post it so that other people can see it, maybe along with your journal article, this is a really useful way to do that. And then you can close this file, and then if you go back to the folder we've been using all along, you can see that it's included in here. So now we have a Lab 1 script, Fall 17. So it created an HTML document with the same name as the script file. And you could go in here and change this name if you wanted to at this point, but the default is it just gives it the name of your script file. So that is super helpful, and one of the main reasons to actually use R Markdown, other than just it's organized in a way that makes it easier to see. Another thing that's useful that I just learned about recently is if you go up here to Session, you can clear your workspace. It always asks this. I usually don't bother checking it. I just say yes. So now everything that we created over here is gone. Sometimes that's useful because R builds on itself. And so if you want to start over and make sure your program really runs like it should, it's good to empty that and make sure things run as they should. Or if you keep getting errors and they just don't make any sense, sometimes it's because you did something weird before, and that's the data it's starting out with, so it's just not working. Another good thing that you can do too is to restart R and clear output. And that will just give you a new session, because sometimes it remembers things that you don't want it to remember. So it's kind of good to refresh without actually having to close the program and open it back up. So that is our introduction to R, RStudio, and R Markdown.